Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we're in Mark chapter 6. We're going to be starting verse 38 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, in verse 37, it says here, and he, meaning Jesus, answered and said unto them, Give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, Shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread and give them to eat? So Jesus wanted, I believe Jesus wanted to include the disciples in this miracle that he was going to do for this vast group of people, and feed them through the disciples, but they didn't believe. They didn't have faith. So Jesus ends up doing this miracle himself, all right? Now, verse 38 says, And he said unto them, How many loaves have ye? Go and see. And when they knew, they say 5 and 2 fishes. Now, again, in John's Gospel, in chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, it says that Andrew said to Jesus that there was a young boy who had 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes, right? But Andrew, after looking at these 5 loaves and these 2 fishes, basically out of helplessness, he says, what are these to all this people? Right? What are these to all this people? 5 loaves of bread, barley loaves, and 2 fish. Can't feed many on that. Probably even can't feed the 12 disciples on that, right? Yet, if there's anything that we must learn about God, it is that God is not limited by numbers. God is not limited by numbers. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 6. And it says here, And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. But the next part is the key. It says, For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. There's no restraint to the Lord to save by many people or by few. And generally speaking, God usually uses the few because God wants the glory. He doesn't want men taking his glory from him. So God, Jonathan and his armor bearer says, let's go over to this host of these uncircumcised Philistines, right? We're gonna do what we can. And if God is for us, we'll get them. If not, well, then we perish. But God isn't limited. I know it's just you and me, but let's go. If we have God, he's on our side. He'll give us the victory, right? God's not limited. And then in Judges chapter 7 and verse 7, it says, And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place, right? I'm going to save Gideon, you and your people, by the 300 men, not by this big vast army, no, but by only 300 men. And then in 2 Chronicles chapter 14 and verse 11, it says, And Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, if it is nothing with you to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee, and in thy name we go against this multitude, O Lord. Thou art our God. Let not man prevail against thee. So Asa says here what? He says, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power? It's nothing with God to help, right? If God is for us, who can be against us, right? God on our side is all we need. This is what we're dealing with here. God on our side is all. Andrew's like, what's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? What's that? But the great provider was there, right? The great provider was in their midst. In Matthew's gospel, chapter 14 and verse 18, Jesus requested that they bring the loaves and the fish to him. No matter what we are attempting to do, by prayer, put it in the Lord's hands. Whatever we're attempting to do, by prayer, put it in the Lord's hands. What are some things that we can put into the Lord's hands? Number one, we can put this day into our hands, into his hands, right? We can put our work into his hands. We can put our school into his hand if we go to school, right? We can put our children, our husband, our wife, we can put it all into God's hands. If we're starting a Bible study, we can put the Bible study into God's hands. What we look at and we say it's helpless, it's not enough. Yet we put it into God's hands, into the Lord's hands, and he will provide. Whatever it is, put it into God's hands. His hands are not only righteous and holy hands, but they are also loving and gracious hands. His hands are not only righteous and holy, but his hands are loving and gracious hands. Now, it said in Matthew's gospel that they were 5 barley loaves, right? 5 barley loaves. Now, loaves of bread that were made of barley were a poor man's food. They were about 1/3 the price of wheat loaves. It was barley that was used to feed horses or mules or donkeys, right? They used barley to feed horses and mules and donkeys. And it is barley that was used in the jealousy offering of Numbers chapter 5 and verse 15. It was barley bread that was used to describe Gideon's low estate and poverty in Judges chapter 7 and verse 13. So barley represents, I don't want to say poverty, but it represents being poor. Barley represents being poor. Therefore, it is possible that the family of this young boy was poor. Okay, it's possible this young boy was from a poor family. They only had barley loaves. They had a couple fish. They didn't have wheat loaves. Jesus does a miracle and feeds 5,000 men along with women and children with this humble, poor man's food. No, it wasn't. It wasn't steak and potatoes. It wasn't fine wheat bread. It was lowly barley bread. In the hands of the master, Jesus can take anything. Jesus can take something that is lowly and make it special. We have to understand that when we put things into Jesus's hands, He can take the lowly things and make them special. And you may say, well, what about me? I feel lowly. Listen, you're already a child of God. You're already God's prince or princess, right? And he's already made you special. You're in his hands. And he can take the lowly things and make them special. But also think of the humility of those who were eating the barley loaves. There were probably some higher class people there. They also would have to humble themselves. This was no time to be stingy. Everybody ate the same food, right? There was no, a disciple comes to your group and brings you barley loaves. Hey, waiter, you got any wheat loaves? No, there was none of that. It was barley and that was it. That's all you got. No time to be stingy. God's grace and blessings are the same for all. When Jesus fed the 5,000 with the barley loaves, they all got the same thing. The rich, the poor, the sick, the healthy, they all got the same thing. And God's grace to us through Jesus Christ, through his cross, it's all the same. It's all grace, right? Isn't that what we were taught when he told the parable of the people got, some people got the same money as the other workers, right? You paid them the same amount of money. I worked all day and you're paying, and they only worked an hour and they got the same thing as I did. That's not fair. No, it's grace. It's grace. It's God's grace. God gives blessings to those that are saved for 40 years as someone that's saved for 4 days or 4 hours. Same salvation. Barley loaves. God humbles us with the barley. Rich and poor, doesn't matter. It's the same grace, the same provision that God has given to every person. Verses 39 and 40, and it says, and he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. And they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s. We're going to finish this lesson in these 2 verses here. So it says here, verse 39, and he commanded them to sit down. All right. Now, this Greek word means to recline. So they were basically sitting down on the grass, all right? And then it says, sit down by companies upon the green grass, okay? So, sit down by companies. Now, this is interesting Greek phrase here. The Greek for companies, it's Sumposia. I know you're looking at me strange, but the Greek for company is Sumposia. All right, 2 words, Sumposia. Now, soon means with, and pino means to drink. So it's basically soon pino, right? So basically, Sumposia means a drinking party, all right? Therefore, it means a party with tables, or it means a company of people arranged at a party. All right, a company of people arranged at a party. So basically, you may say, how does this relate to being out in a desert place where there's no tables, no chairs, and there's no party going on, right? Why does Jesus say Sumposia? Because that was a very well-known phrase back then that when Jesus said, I want you to have them sit down by companies, by symposia, the disciples knew exactly how Jesus wanted them to be grouped, how he wanted them to sit down. Right? Jesus repeats this Greek word because he is stressing that he wants them to be seated as if they were at a party, in company after company. Company after company. The disciples knew exactly what Jesus meant when he said symposia. We don't, because we don't know the Greek words, but now we do. It means in groups, all right? In groups of people. He doesn't want it all cluttered together in one big glob of people. He wants them separated into companies, all right? It would be like if you had a wedding feast or something, or some kind of big gathering, and you're renting out a big hall, right? How are we going to fit 500 people into this hall? Well, we're going to put table here, here, here. You have it separated out. That's what Jesus did. Now, in verse 40 it says, and they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by fifties. Now, this Greek word for ranks is prosia. And this is a very interesting Greek word that Mark uses to describe the scene. So you have to understand, Mark wasn't there at this time. He's getting his gospel from Peter. Mark's gospel is basically, could be renamed the Gospel of Peter. Mark is writing down what he learned from Peter about when Jesus was on earth and his travel. So when Peter was with Jesus. And in this situation, Mark chooses to use the word prosia, all right, in ranks. Now, this Greek word literally means a garden bed, or a plot. A garden bed. So he says they sat down in ranks or in garden beds. Mark is trying to help you to describe the scene. In your mind, he wants you to see this scene in front of, as if you were Jesus standing here and seeing the people sitting down. Mark is describing the scene in this desert place. And what does it look like? He says it's like a garden plot. All right? It's like a garden bed. Mark describes the scene as groups of people sitting down on the grass like independent beds of flowers. And with people wearing different colors of clothing, it would give a flower bed impression. So Peter tells Mark, you know, Mark, when he fed the 5,000 and when the people, I saw the people. Mark, I want to tell you, I saw the people and they were spread out like, it was almost like flowers here and all the people and all the colors. It was amazing. There was like 50, 75 people here. There was like 100 people here, and then another group of 100 people here, and then a group of 50 people here, and they all had different colors. It was like this vast, big, huge bed of garden, like a flower garden out there. And that's how Peter describes to Mark, and that's how Mark writes it down. It's like he said it in ranks, in prosia, in garden beds. If only the men were, now listen, if only the men were numbered at 5,000 and not every man was married, okay, there would still be about 10 to 15,000 people here that are being fed. And it's counting those that were married and had children. So when it says here there were 5,000 men, Not all of those men were married. I'm sure many of them were, and many of them had children too. So imagine how many acres it would take to sit 10 to 15,000 people in groups of 50 to 100 and still be able to walk in between each company comfortably, right? Because a lot of times we read these things and we don't take time to imagine the vastness of the area that this had to cover. You've got 10, 15,000 people, and you're going to sit them down in groups of 50s or 100s. There's talking a lot of acreage here. It's not just some little backyard, festival, or, somebody's got a big piece of land out in back of their house. It isn't that at all. We're probably talking 10, 15, 20 acres, maybe more, depending upon how far apart they stayed with each other, how far apart each group was. I mean, we're talking 10, 15 acre. I know my father, many years ago, back in the 1930s, he bought a plot of land for 10 acres. 10 acres of land, bought it for $1,000. Can you imagine? 10 acres of land for $1,000. That was back in the 1930s. Anyways, we still have it. And I can imagine in my mind that plot of land. It's rectangle shape. It goes back and here. And I can imagine 10 acres. And I'm thinking, 5,000, 10 or 15,000 people sitting down isn't going to fit in that 10 acres of land. It's going to probably take another 10 acres to be taught, and imagine when you go back, you walk back to Jesus and he gives you more barley loaves and some fish. And then you have to walk all the way back to that 10 acres and hand it out and then come all the way back. There's a lot of work involved there. There's a vast area of space. So we're going to continue on in verse 41 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.